you know, there's lots of enjoyable things out there that aren't necessarily good for you. But hedonism tells you that they are. I mean, on some level, we all crave sugar, right? Because our ancestors were starving. This is an aside. And sugar was a way to produce fat, which would get you through the winter. But now that you have unlimited access to these things, there's no moderation. And so things that would have been positive to your ancient ancestors on the verge of starvation are now negative to us in our modern day. And hedonism, at least Lord Henry's philosophy, doesn't take note of that at all. Anyway, the worship of the senses has often, and with much justice, been decried, men feeling a natural instinct of terror about the passions and sensations that seem stronger than themselves, and that they are conscious of sharing with the less highly organized forms of existence. But it appeared to Dorian Gray that the true nature of these senses had never been understood, and that they had remained savage and animal merely because the world had sought to starve them into submission or kill them by pain, instead of aiming at making them elements of a new spirituality, of which a fine instinct for beauty was to be the dominant characteristic. As he looked back upon man moving through history, he was haunted by a feeling of loss. So much had been surrendered, and to such little purpose. There had been mad, willful rejections, monstrous forms of self-torture and self-denial, whose origin was fear. Fear and conscience, go back to Lord Henry again. And whose result was degradation infinitely more terrible than the fancied degradation from which, in their ignorance, they had sought to escape. Nature, in her wonderful irony, driving out the anchorite to feed with the animals of the desert, and giving to the hermit the beasts of the field as his companions. Yes, there was to be, as Lord Henry had prophesied, a new hedonism that was to recreate life and to save it from that harsh, uncomely Puritanism that is having in our day its curious revival. It was to have its service of the intellect, certainly, yet it was never to accept any theory or system that would involve the sacrifice of any mode of passionate experience. Its aim, indeed, was to experience itself, and not the fruits of experience, sweet or bitter as they might be. Of the asceticism that deadens the senses, as of the vulgar profligacy that dulls them, it was to know nothing, but it was to teach man to concentrate himself upon the moments of a life that is itself but a moment. So the new hedonism is all about experience, right? You need to experience everything there is to experience. We don't care if the experience is good or bad. We don't care what moral events the experience creates. It's just having the experience that matters. Because life is fleeting, and if you can live the moments of your life, you can experience more than other people, and that's the god of this new hedonism. It's not anything else. There are few of us who have not sometimes wakened before dawn, either after one of those dreamless nights that make us almost enamored of death, or one of those nights of horror and misshapen joy, where through the chambers of the brain sweep phantoms more terrible than reality itself. An instinct with that vivid life that lurks in all grotesques, and that lends to Gothic art its enduring vitality, this art being, one might fancy, especially the art of those whose minds have been troubled with the malady of reverie. Gradually white fingers creep through the curtains, and they appear to tremble. In black fantastic shapes, dumb shadows crawl into the corners of the room and crouch there. Outside, there is a stirring of birds among the leaves, or the sound of men going forth to their work, or the sigh and sob of the wind coming down from the hills and wandering round the silent house, as though it feared to wake the sleepers, and yet must needs call forth sleep from her purple cave. Veil after veil of thin, dusty gauze is lifted, and by degrees the forms and colors of things are restored to them. And we watch the dawn remaking the world in its antique pattern. The wan mirrors get back their mimic life. The flameless tapers stand where we had left them, and beside them lies the half-cut book that we had been studying, or the wired flower that we had worn at a ball, or the letter we had been afraid to read, or that we had read too often. Nothing seems to us changed. Out of the unreal shadows of the night comes back the real life that we had known. We have to resume it where we had left off, and there steals over us a terrible sense of the necessity for the continuance of energy in the same wearisome round of stereotyped habits, or a wild longing, it may be, that our eyelids might open some morning upon a world that has been transformed anew in the darkness for our pleasure, a world in which things would have fresh shapes and colors and be changed, or have other secrets, A world in which the past would have little or no place, or survive at any rate, in no conscious form of obligation or regret, the remembrance of even the joy having its bitterness, and the memories of a pleasure their pain. There's some paradox in there. But the idea here is Dorian Gray would love to wake up to a new world every day. He's tired of the sensations, the obligations, the life that he's living, and he's seeking for new sensations, new obligations, a new life. And I think that is all fed by the book. If you recall, the description of the book was about a man who tried to live the essence of every century leading up to the 19th century. So he lived a bunch of different lives and tried to experience everything there was to experience from multiple centuries of human existence. And I think Dorian is trying to do the same thing. It was a creation of such worlds as these that seemed to Dorian Gray to be the true object, or among the true objects of life, and in his search for sensations, that world be at once new and delightful, and possess that element of strangeness that is essential to romance. There's the romantic idea in there. Dorian Gray being sort of the synthesis of romanticism and realism, to live in reality the romantic dreams of others. You need a lot of wealth, you need a lot of power to do that, and Dorian Gray has those things. He would often adopt certain modes of thought that he knew to be really alien to his nature, abandon himself to their subtle influence, and then, having, as it were, caught their color and satisfied his intellectual curiosity, leave them with that curious indifference that is not incompatible with a real ardor of temperament, and that indeed, according to certain modern psychologists, is often a condition of it. It was rumored of him once that he was about to join the Roman Catholic communion, and certainly the Roman ritual had always a great attraction for him. The daily sacrifice, more awful really than all the sacrifices of the antique world, stirred him as much by its superb rejection of the evidence of the senses as by the primitive simplicity of its elements, and the eternal pathos of the human tragedy that it sought to symbolize. He loved to kneel down on the cold marble pavement and watch the priest in his stiff, flowered dalmatic slowly and with white hands moving aside the veil of the tabernacle, or raising aloft the jeweled lantern-shaped monstrance with that pallid wafer that at times one would fain think is indeed the blood of Christ, or the bread of the angels, or robed in the garments of the passion of Christ, breaking the host into the chalice, and smiting his breast for his sins, the fuming censers that the grave boys in their lace and scarlet tossed into the air like great gilt flowers had their subtle fascination for him. As he passed out, he used to look with wonder at the black confessionals, and long to sit in the dim shadow of one of them, listening to men and women whispering through the worn grating the true story of their lives. So he has a quick fling or fascination with the Catholic Church, and it seems that he's very fascinated with the idea of confessional and with the ritual. Maybe because he's never confessed anything in his whole life and he's hiding the secret of his soul. I mean, there might be something in that. But he never fell into the error of arresting his intellectual development by any formal acceptance of any creed or system, or of making for a house in which to live an inn that is but suitable for the sojourn of a night, or a few hours of a night in which there are no stars and the moon is in travail. Pause, that's a metaphor. The church is not a home, according to Dorian Gray. It's a place to spend a night. It's a place to entertain yourself on vacation, but not a place to stay forever. Mysticism, with its marvelous power of making common things strange to us, and the subtle antinomianism that always seems to accompany it, moved him for a season. And for a season he inclined to the materialistic doctrines of the Darwinists movement in Germany, and found a curious pleasure in tracing the thoughts and passions of men to some pearly cell in the brain or some white nerve in the body, delighting in the conception of the absolute dependence of the spirit on certain physical conditions, morbid or healthy, normal or diseased. Yet, as has been said of him before, no theory of life seemed to him to be of any importance compared with life itself. He felt keenly conscious of how barren all intellectual speculation is when separated from action and experiment. He knew that the senses, no less than the soul, have their spiritual mysteries to reveal. And so he would now study perfumes. This is the sense of smell. He's dedicating himself to the study of things that smell. Check this whole section out. and the secrets of their manufacture, distilling heavily scented oils and burning odorous gums from the east. He saw that there was no mood of the mind that had not its counterpart in the sensuous life, and set himself to discover their true relations, wondering what there was in frankincense that made one mystical, and in ambergris that stirred one's passions, and in violets that woke the memory of dead romances, and in musk that troubled the brain, and in champak that stained the imagination, and seeking often to elaborate a real psychology of perfumes, and to estimate the several influences of sweet-smelling roots and scented pollen-laden flowers, of aromatic balms and of dark fragrant woods, of spikenard that sickens, of Hovernia that makes men mad, and of aloes that are said to be able to expel melancholy from the soul. At another time, he devoted himself entirely to music, so we've gone from smell to sound. And music, of course, is associated with Satan and all of that kind of stuff, with the music, the angel of music going bad and all that kind of stuff. At another time, he devoted himself entirely to music, and in a long latticed room with vermilion and gold ceiling and walls of olive green lacquer, he used to give curious concerts in which mad gypsies tore wild music from little zithers, or grave yellow-shawled Tunisians plucked at the strained strings of monstrous lutes. That word monstrous, I think, is characterizing as well. While grinning Negroes beat monotonously upon copper drums, and crouching upon scarlet mats, slim-turbaned Indians blew through long pipes of reeds or brass, and charmed or feigned to charm great hooded snakes and horrible horned adders. The harsh intervals and shrill discords of barbaric music stirred him at times when Schubert's Grace and Chopin's Beautiful Sorrows and the mighty harmonies of Beethoven himself fell unheeded on his ear. He collected together from all parts of the world the strangest instruments that could be found, either in tombs of dead nations or among the few savage tribes that survived contact with Western civilizations, and loved to touch and try them. He had a mysterious Juruperi of Rio Negro Indians that women are not allowed to look at, and that even youths may not see till they have been subjected to fasting and scourging, and the earthen jars of the Peruvians that have still the shrill cries of birds and flutes of human bones, such as Alfonso de Oval heard in Chile, and the sonorous green jaspers that are found near Cuzco and give forth a note of singular sweetness. He had painted gourds filled with pebbles that rattled when they were shaken, and long clarin of the Mexicans, into which the former does not blow, but through which he inhales the air, the harsh true of the Amazonian tribes that is sounded by the sentinels who sit all day in the high trees, and can be heard, it is said, at a distance of 3 leagues. The Teponotzli that had 2 vibrating tongues of wood, and is beaten with sticks that are smeared with an elastic gum obtained from the milky juice of plants, the yodel bells of the Aztecs that are hung in clusters like grapes, and a huge cylindrical drum covered with the skins of great serpents, like the one that Bernal Diaz saw when he went with Cortez into the Mexican temple, and of whose doleful sound he has left us so vivid a description. The fantastic character of these instruments fascinated him, and he felt a curious delight in the thought that art, like nature, has her monsters. Again, monsters. We've also had snakes in here twice. Snake charmers and a drum made with snake skin. Things of bestial shape and with hideous voices. Yet after some time he wearied of them, and would sit in his box at the opera, either alone or with Lord Henry, listening in rapt pleasure to Tannhauser, and seeing in the prelude to that great work of art a presentation of the tragedy of his own soul. So I'm going to pause here for a second. Dorian Gray is living sort of a life of the senses through collecting. But the interesting thing about it is, as much as he tries to collect, as much as he tries to have every sensation, hear every sound that can be heard through a musical instrument, learn everything there is to learn about the sensation of sound, he grows bored with it. He experiences ennui like the boredom with life, the inevitable outcome of the privileged, and certainly that's going on with Dorian. But we also want to talk about the way that he's getting these things from all around the world and bringing them to himself and using them for his own personal pleasure. He seems almost to be looking down upon them, even as he seeks them out for his own benefit. Look at the way he characterizes the people not as people, but almost as curiosities.